Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another week of the Better Events podcast. This is Mary Davidson, one of your co-hosts. And in today's episode, you're going to need to break out your Advil, your aspirin, and your ibuprofen because we are talking about event headaches and how to solve them. Together, we are going to troubleshoot some common event headaches that we as event professionals probably all face. So we're excited to get into it. Let's go ahead and start the episode.
Welcome to the Better Events Podcast. Join two event strategists, Logan Clements and Mary Davidson, who believe we can all create, host, and attend better events. In this podcast, you will learn about event strategy and actions that you can use today as an event host, planner, or manager. Hear directly from the people who are creating innovative and inspiring events today and tomorrow, and grow your business along the way. Now, let's get started, and thanks for listening to the Better Events Podcast.
Welcome back to another episode of the Better Events Podcast. I'm Logan Clements, one of your co-hosts, and I'm joined by fellow co-host Mary Davidson. And this week, we are talking all about event headaches and how to solve them. And before we really jump into it, you know, we love a conversation starter. And this is, Mary, we're close to Thanksgiving. So how do you actually feel about the Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade?
I'm actually stoked about this question. I have an event dream to work the Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade. I had the audacity during the pandemic to email them because I thought their live stream was bad and basically saying, do you need help next year? Like, I have the capability to do that. But so I'm saying this because I'm passionate about the Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade. I love it. My dream is to go to it, is to work it, is whatever. So I'm here for it. But Logan, what about you? How do you actually feel about the Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade?
I'm not going to have as good of an answer as you just gave.
What do you mean?
I feel like I'm one that my affinity for Thanksgiving Day parades is actually our Philadelphia one, which that's just what I grew up going to. It's exactly like the Macy's Day Parade, except instead of New York, it's in Philly. And then the other big thing is all the big names go to New York. And so in Philly, we definitely get like the B-list, C-list celebrities with nothing against them. They're just way more niche. And so it often involves some Googling. Like we wouldn't get the winner of American Idol. We would get like the fifth runner-up from American Idol. So I feel like I always enjoyed that. And then by the time we got home, we could watch like the tail end of the Macy's Day Parade. So I will say I haven't probably consumed it as a viewer as much now as like an event person, but I will agree with you, Mary. I think I was very underwhelmed, especially maybe it was, their COVID year. I feel like I purposely wanted to watch it. I think I woke up at 6 a.m. Pacific to watch it specifically because I was excited. And then, it was pretty underwhelming. But I love that you sent them a note.
I feel like I remember us texting about it too, if I recall correctly. I'm sure I wouldn't put it past us. We probably did something like that.
We probably were commiserating on something.
Yes. The audacity of us both. But so if you watch the Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade this year, let us know your hot takes about the parade. I will be watching it. So, okay, we're going to move into our topic. We're talking about event headaches and how to solve them. And so we picked this topic because, let's be honest, components of events can be headaches. They just are. It's kind of the nature of the game. And I think I literally usually come back from an event with an actual headache. It just from all of the stuff that you have to do. But we also just experience the tough part of events when we're doing them. And so we're going to troubleshoot some of those headaches together today that most of us probably experience.
Yes. And before we jump into that, we do want to remind you that we are hosting the Better Events Conference next month, December 18th and 19th. We're hosting an in-person day in Tacoma and a virtual day where you can access it from anywhere. And we're offering 2 different ticket types, an all access, which gets you access to both days, or the general admission, which is for Thursday only. And I know, Mary, I'm personally very excited about our international events panel, where we're talking about how you can grow your career by booking some international events and international clients. We have representation from Canada, Europe. We have some other fun ones potentially from the Middle East that we are getting. So it's going to be a great episode. A great session. So we highly encourage you to join us. So buy your tickets at bettereventspod.com/conference. All right. So jumping in for event headaches, like Mary mentioned, I feel like this all comes with the business, but what are some things about events that you think are a headache, Mary? This can be like high level or maybe just top of mind? I feel like both of us are in our busy event seasons for the fall, so probably more top of mind, but why don't you kick us off?
I'm just gonna like list the first things that come to my brain. And maybe or maybe not, I'll expand on them later. But right now, some things and events that are a headache. Post-event work. Being on site for more than 10 hours is hard. That can be a real headache. I think working with different personalities is the nature of our job. That's draining and can be a headache. I think getting people to attend events is a headache. And then what else can I say? There's probably a million things. Not drinking enough water gives you a headache. So those are all of the things. Some of the things I should say. I could actually name a million more things, but that's where I'm going to start. That's what's top of mind. Logan, what about you? What are some things top of mind that are headaches for events?
Yeah, this is a hard one. Again, we should have probably asterisked this by we love our jobs and we love working in
We
events.
do. We love our jobs. We love our clients. We love events. Yes.
But you could still have headaches and love what you're doing.
Yeah.
So I think for me, I'm coming mainly out of the production side of things. So biggest headache is often last minute content changes, the speaker coming at you with the dreaded USB, just having rehearsals and actually sticking to rehearsal times is a big headache that I find. Mismanaging client expectations. So maybe what they were sold by their AV company is not what they're actually understanding once they're there. And then you have lots of last minute changes. And again, all these headaches, I'm also like, this is where Mary and my superpowers come out because we're good at helping with these things. But I feel like those are big ones. Staying hydrated. Yes, Mary, that's probably like staying hydrated and remembering to eat and or client remembering to feed the crew is one of my big headaches because it's such an easy thing to do and yet such a headache if it gets missed.
Before we continue with this week's episode, here's a quick ad about our 2024 Better Events Conference. If you're looking to grow and connect with other event pros, this conference is for you in December. It's going to be Wednesday, December 18th, Thursday, December 19th, 2 days of conference fun. The 18th on Wednesday is going to be all in person in Tacoma, Washington, just outside of Seattle. And then Thursday, December 19th is going to be 100% virtual. We are offering 2 different tickets this year, an all access pass that gets you both the in-person day on the 18th and the virtual on the 19th, as well as a general admission virtual only for Thursday, December 19th. We had so much fun at our first conference last year. We cannot wait to see you and meet you. So get your tickets at bettereventspod.com/conference.
Other production headaches. Big one has been speaker changes. I had a big one where we didn't know if the speaker was bringing their own laptop or if we were running their content. And this was something they told us 6 minutes before we were supposed to open doors.
Anxiety.
Yes. Yes. You could tell, Mary, I did it with a smile, but it was like, oh my gosh, it's like, how can we avoid this? And in my notes, I really wrote, could we have said no? Which is like just a rhetorical question because I don't know if we really couldn't have. This person was a big speaker, but I think more are going to come out as we continue to discuss. But listeners, I'm sure you have your own things that you're like, oh, I wish they would have mentioned this.
Absolutely. I think we all have them. And it's those things like, in the moment, you have composure in the moment that it happens, but internally you're like deep sighing, looking up to the sky and saying like, oh my gosh. Those moments, those are what we're talking about. We can all relate, I think. But Logan, would you say that your typical event headaches are something that are that way just because that's the way they are? Or they continue to happen time and time again because that's how the industry kind of just is? Or are they things that can actually be solved?
It really depends, honestly. I mean, this is like the beauty of the industry and why we have some of you guys are asking us for templates and things that will always apply. And I just have found, and maybe I'm not the majority, but I just find some of my clients are different. So I'll give you 2 examples. One where I will say it was something that is solvable and I can tell you how we solved it. And the other one that I think is almost insolvable, or it's at least factors out of my control. So the one that's out of my control is I have a client whose CEO always opens up their whole conference on the first day, and we always have it scheduled for about 15 minutes. In rehearsal, he gets pretty close to 15 minutes or says, don't worry, I'll go faster. I've worked this event for 3 years. Next year will be my 4th year. Every year he goes at least 15 minutes over, which if you do that math, listeners, he literally goes for double the time. And it's happened the last 3 years. And every time I go, we need to just adjust the run of show. And it's not aspirational. Keep telling him he has 15 minutes, but we should plan for 30 because it impacts the end time of the session, which impacts the start of the breakouts right after. It's like this whole trickle down effect, which I'm not being dramatic, but it does make a big impact. And yet I can say those things and they don't want to make that change because he always wants to see the total runtime for the session. So he would notice if we had padded 15 minutes. But honestly, that's the only solution I can see for it. So now we just always talk about, so when it goes over, who are we texting? Who are we talking to? And everything has to shift. But that is a little frustrating because I do feel like, don't they call that's like the definition of insanity is like continuing to do the same thing and hoping for a different outcome. So that is a client I will continue to push for, but just know that that's common. And I had smaller versions of this with some other clients. And then one where I actually was able to solve it was a client who had a lot of last minute changes. I'd worked with them a couple years ago, and it wasn't anything unsurmountable, but it just made the days stressful because every speaker brought different slides or told us a different thing than what we had. Everything was outdated. And so then this year I suggested that we do tech checks. And we've talked about this on the podcast before, that like wording, reframe. Instead of saying the R word of rehearsal, we said tech checks and emphasized it was more to check the microphone, to check, they knew where to come on stage. They could see where their slides are. They work the clicker. And by doing that, we also were able to say, hey, here's our slides we have for you. Are these the most updated? And I had a pretty good, I'd say probably 70% of the speakers took advantage of the tech check. And in that, we caught over half of them I had outdated information for. And so on the event day, I will say over the 2 days, I maybe had one speaker who came up to me with a new plan or setup that they needed. And that was someone who didn't come to a tech check. So it solved from being that 80 to 90% of my speakers were giving me last minute information and changes. Now I only had 5%. I had one. And that was something that doing a simple tweak of saying, bring me in a half day early. Let's set up 2 hours of tech checks. They schedule them in 15 minutes each. And it just made the event day so much easier. So Mary, how about you? Do you feel like your typical event headaches are something you can solve, or do they just keep happening?
I mean, I think that there's a little bit of both. I do think there's a level of like trends, like this is just how events are. This is how it goes, especially in like the nonprofit work that I'm a part of. It's very much like a level of there's this tradition that's happening. And so this is just the way that it's done. But I think like that's been changing a little bit over time, and people have some more flexibility to shake things up a little bit and see if something else will work. So with that in mind, I think, and depending on, not just the event industry, but the industry in which your events and organizations are, I think that really impacts kind of what you can do and if something is solvable in that moment or not. So I would say my biggest headaches are things that people do just because that's the way they've done them. And to me, that's tradition and that's frustrating. And so I would say, like, with that in mind, they're not completely solvable, but maybe over time you can see shifts or trend changes, and then they can become a little bit more solvable, or you can convince them to change a little something. So I think that's like a little vague, but that's kind of the world that I'm living in right now, is just dealing with tradition and those headaches.
And like, how do you deal with that? Like as a planner, is that something that you just have to, like, are you just accepting with it? Do you find each year you have to be like, you're like frustrated, then you're like, well, that's just the way, that's the tradition of it all? Or
I think it would be a very frustrating job if I was always trying to change people's minds. Like, I really don't think in life in general that you can really change somebody's mind. Like, I think they need to decide that it's valuable. And so, I'll always kind of say, well, some organizations are doing it this way. That's like a little different, and that's really working for them. It may not work for you. You know your audience better than I do. I always like say that exact thing to them, but this might work. So if you want to try to shift maybe just one thing, we can do this, or we could do this, or we could do this. You don't have to do all of it, but we could choose one thing. And they're usually on board with something like that. So I feel like it's a respect of like, your organization and I'm an outside person, but I can tell you what's working for the other people we're working with. And I think that's some good data to be able to use to change someone's mind.
Yeah, I just want to highlight what you said there, because I think that's so important as planners or event managers, in-house, external, it doesn't matter, coming in with that knowledge of like, maybe we just try to change one thing. If changing 15 things is insurmountable, here's one thing we can do better. And I think a lot of clients, like you say, are receptive to that because they are looking to improve, and maybe one tweak feels better than the 15 tweaks they need to do. And then another tactic, like you just mentioned, but again, I want to highlight for listeners, I think is so helpful when you're making suggestions. Anything you can pull from other clients, and you don't have to name names. I know a lot of folks work with clients. They can't say, oh, Google does this or whatever. You can just say another nonprofit client or another tech conference did this. It was really successful. Maybe that applies to you guys. Because I do think it's not like it's a competition, but I do think clients are more receptive hearing it's something that somebody else did, or a lesson you learned from that of maybe not how not to do it. Just comes off a little better than you saying like, oh, me as the planner, this is what I think we should do. And instead being like, I had this other client, we tried this, it worked really well. It might apply to you guys. It feels a little bit of like a softer sell, I feel like, than just coming in and saying, here's how you have to do it.
Yeah, I think it's definitely something worth trying and see if it works for sure. Our next question I'm so excited about, Logan, I have to say, because we're going to cue the dreaded job interview question, and it's going to have its moment right now. So Logan, can you share a memorable experience or a particularly challenging event moment? What was the issue and how did you handle it? Because this is what we're talking about. We're talking about event headaches. So I am thrilled to ask this basic dreaded question to you right now.
It is my favorite and least favorite question, I feel like, because I just feel like this turns into a throwaway question for interviews, but it is also can be telling of, yes, how do people deal with conflict?
How are you a problem solver? Yeah.
Exactly. But I'm like, everyone seems, for me, I more want to be like, what's your event chill like? When the world's on fire, give me I'd rather do a hypothetical situation, I think. Sorry, that's my soapbox. Of just being like, here's what you've got. How do you handle it? Who do you talk to first? Who are you calling? I mean, my recent one that I mentioned as a headache was, I had a keynote speaker come up 6 minutes before doors were supposed to open. And the days prior, I had been like, we need to know, is it their own laptop? Are they using their laptop? Are they giving us slides? It was back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. The day prior, they're finally like, the client was like, we're going to put our foot down. I was like, great, love that. And they're like, we're going to say, if he doesn't give us his slides now, we're just going to make him go without slides. He's supposedly very charismatic. He can just do it without slides. I was like, that sounds great. End of day, they go, yeah, for sure. No slides, no laptop, nothing. At 8:09, when doors open at 8:15 for an 8:30 start, and this man's on stage, and at 8:35, he comes up, they are like, he's on his way on headset. They're like, he's on his way and he wants to show his laptop. It's like, great, I'm coming to meet you at the stage. We come to the stage. Luckily, we left all our line drops and everything. And so the way it turns out he wanted to share his laptop and he had slides. And so the way that I handled this was something that I knew I personally needed to handle, just because it was a high stress situation that would make our tech team unhappy, but also the client was clearly stressed, but wanted to make the speaker happy. So it was like 3 different parties. And I knew if I can just come in and just mitigate, understand it first, get a handle on what he wants to do, then go back to our tech team and say, is this possible in the next 15 minutes? Yes or no? And then if so, how much time do we need to hold doors? And telling client, because you want us to do this, we're gonna have to hold doors. And so just kind of circling the wagons of what's possible. Can we do it? Yes or no? How much time does it take? And then really advocating for my tech team to say, we're not going to open doors until we are ready. And so that it seemed like it was a lot of expectation management with a lot of different parties. And I will say the hard part was I had a nice big smile on my face the entire time, though I do think I built some rapport with the client, and they could tell like with my eyeballs that they were like, we know this isn't ideal, but we're all smiling through it and making it happen. And the session ended up being great, but it was just one of those. I think how I handled it was, continuing to remain calm at the outside, and then just being really grateful to the crew once we got through that session, of saying thank you to them and explicitly saying thank you for doing that last minute adjustment and the last minute tweaks and, everything we did to make that piece happen. And then getting ahead of it. If I ever work with the speaker again, I'm just making a note that he pulled this in the past. And I would just say we are just as prepared as we were before. If anything, we just need to pre-plan that doors would need to open later, because he's someone who just comes in with last minute changes.
I think something you said is like really interesting, the call out, which is you have to manage expectations when you're dealing with these event headaches. But I don't think that's just with other people. It's also with yourself. I think that's like a huge part of these headaches is these are things that we experience, like what Logan just described. I think most reasonable people would say like, yeah, that's annoying. That's an event headache for sure. And so there's a level of like, okay, like kind of what you said, but like this is my responsibility to deal with it, so we're going to deal with it. And like I don't know. So it's just a lot of it is managing expectations when you're problem solving a headache, I think. So anyway, I wanted to call that out. I like that you said that. I have an example to share as well from a recent event. And actually, I shouldn't say it's a recent event. It's more like this whole season has kind of been um, really headachy when it comes to event setup and tear down. And I think we talked a little bit about this on the podcast, but it's something that we talk about as a team, my team, a lot. I think it's like the bane of our existence, aka an event headache, setup and tear down. And part of it is that out of all of our terms and conditions in our contracts, this is the term and condition that we've changed the most. And so it's like every year we've had a different iteration because we like keep learning a hard lesson. And so my headache is, for example, well, last year we were at an event and we ended up staying until like 3 a.m. and we were doing a bunch of tear down and like cleanup of all of these supplies and decorations and things like that. And the reason we did it is because everybody else left and there was a level of, well, we don't want to leave our client with this mess, even though this might be a lot of it above our scope. We're still going to do what we can. We ended up staying till 3 a.m. They were super grateful, et cetera, et cetera. But also we were so like physically exhausted after that event that I was like, we can never do this again. Like this is not the service that I want to provide. We're not doing this. We're not like a labor company. You can hire moving companies and people who help with that, but we're like an event planning company. So there's only like so much that we can do. And so my headache is like as an I don't know if it's as an industry or if it's just the nature of events. When do you leave an event? I think that's like a question that I have, and that's caused some headache for me because in our scopes, we'll kind of have how many hours on site that will be day of. But if it's a hot mess, are you still like, okay, see ya? Like there's this level of like client relation, right? And you can try to set them up for success before by really managing expectations and telling them like what you can do and just confirming like, hey, we're leaving at midnight kind of regardless of what's going on. So we're going to really try to utilize the volunteers, like just make sure you're on the same page. But this has been a headache. So this is turning into more of a venting sesh right now. But how do I solve it? I'm trying to figure that part out. We have changed our terms and conditions again to be very, very specific. And in fact, if somebody reads it, it is absolutely one of those times when you are like, who hurt you? Like it's that specific. Because it literally says like, we will not move tables and chairs, like things like that, which sounds crazy because that's part of events. But when you're doing multiple events in a week, that's like physically demanding for a lot of people. And I don't think that's like a fair thing to assume that we are going to be doing for somebody. And so I don't know if I know the answer to this, but we're trying to set expectations and problem solve and change it in our contracts and call it out to clients now at the very beginning. So that should help. But from an industry standpoint, I don't know. I don't know what people are doing or how they get around this.
I mean, I think everybody's different, just like you say. I mean, I'm already in my head. It is hard to walk away from a client who needs you. I mean, I've like for one tack there, it's like, yeah, you stayed. And then maybe after the fact, you're like, hey, I'm not charging for you this year, but just so you know, we did go into X hours of overtime for my team. And to the point that like a strategy is if you personally don't want to do it, like as your team, Mary, it's like make it a price point that would hurt and then maybe provide them the like, 4 movers for 4 hours is, these two. So yes, if you really want my team to do it, they're getting, extra money for it. Or if, this other solution, I know I personally also for production, overtime is very common. So it is something that I either call out with some clients of like, hey, if we're in 10 hours of overtime, anything over 10 hours is overtime, just so they, again, and I was anti-overtime, I feel like years ago, or I didn't understand why it was so crucial. But to your point, Mary, of like, it is draining. It is, if you have multiple 12, 10 plus hour days in a row, you are getting mentally drained. So the point of overtime is to also have a financial pain point to avoid you doing that because your crew's tired, you're tired. Like mistakes can happen when folks are tired. So that is just, there's like a reason for why you want to make it painful and not have people for unlimited amounts of time. Another tack I've taken is for some clients where it's not as easy to do that is I just factor in overtime to my quote. When I give them a project rate, I just factor in knowing, and usually again, having worked with them, I just factor that in, and it's based on, the hours. But I don't necessarily call that out saying, oh, there's overtime included. I just say, you got me from this hour to this hour. So that's, I feel like, two ways. But yes, that is so tough with, especially when you work with clients that just don't know what they don't know, right? And they're not taking advantage of you purposely. They just literally need help to get out of a space by 2 a.m. So, but Mary, kind of moving on, what's the importance of remaining calm under pressure when these headaches arise? And what are some of your tactics for resolving headaches quickly?
Yeah, I think that's why we're hired, is to problem solve on site and resolve these headaches. A lot of times in real time, you can do as much as you can to be proactive, but a lot of that happens, on site in the moment things come up. And I like the part of the question about how do you resolve it quickly, because I do think that's part of it too. Like, you need to react, and you need to react well and quickly. And so I think it's really important to remain calm under pressure. Literally, like, you could talk about calmness for a million years. That's like the key trait of an event planner, is to be calm. And we talked about that a lot on the podcast. Logan has her fun duck analogy. So it's all those wonderful things. Like, it's true. It's extremely important to remain calm, and to resolve them quickly. I feel like you have to do that from a few ways. One is like either having experience or having a team around you who has experience that can support you in that decision. And sometimes that can be a vendor. So if it's like a venue thing, sometimes I'll go to like the banquet captain. I'm like, hey, we got to fix this. I need your help, because that's also their expertise. So it's working with your team and your partners, and knowing what everybody's strengths are ahead of time so you can resolve something quickly. It's not always up to you. You can rely on the other people that are there, but you just need to be prepared to know, who's who and what's what, so that you can do that. Logan, would you add anything to that?
Yeah, I think to your point, it's just so important we talk about backup plans, and I love talking through scenarios with the client, with vendors, with anybody, especially as you get more seasoned and you have these questions. To Mary's point, I always say, whenever someone has a very specific question, I always in my head just go, who hurt you? Like some situation happened where now you have to ask about this. And I have my own things that I ask about. For example of one for who hurt me is my my A2. I always ask them, do they lock microphones on? That is industry standard to do. But I had a scenario where it wasn't locked on, a speaker fidgeted with their mic, and they walked up on stage and their mic was off. And the only way it happens is because they were playing with it. But yeah, so I think that's just really important in terms of headaches, having your list to call out, taking that time, and having time in your schedule to like talk about backup plans. I think we talk about setup, we talk about all these things. You can do these calls ahead of time. But I've also found if you have the pleasure of having a setup day where your event's the next day or days later, to get everyone in the room together and say, let's talk about this. Or yes, if we have a security emergency, who are we actually calling? And do we all have that number? Thinking through all of those scenarios and then reviewing them.
I love it. Absolutely. Our next question, and Logan, I think this is really important, because it's about what strategies you use to prevent communication breakdowns between team members, vendors, clients, all those people. Because I do think one of the biggest headaches that we can experience working with people is communication. And it's way easier said than done sometimes. So with that in mind, Logan, what strategies do you use to prevent those breakdowns in communication with all those key players during an event?
Yeah, I love, like I said, that meeting I think is so important, and having a sit down. And if it can't be team wide, I at least like myself and the client, the decision maker, so then I can share that out with everyone. And then, I love a good comms plan, and I love being on headset. Mary knows this from events she's worked with me. You can do a lot via group text, but there is nothing as quick and instantaneous as all being on production headset where it's multi-channeled, or even as simple as a walkie-talkie. But I do think those channels, group chats, walkie-talkie, headsets are all helpful, but do really think about who truly needs to be on those channels, because more doesn't necessarily equal better. I feel like, Mary, you get this more with some of your events that are run by boards or committees, but it just needs to be, you need a group chat with just the key decision makers. Or this one event I worked, I just said, I need one client on a walkie-talkie with me. And it doesn't matter to me who it is, just someone who can be the key decision maker to tell me, yes, we're ready to open doors, or, whatever it is. But making sure that you have some way to communicate. Again, texting is okay. But I always feel like a walkie-talkie or a headset's faster.
I love that you said walkie-talkie. It didn't even cross my mind, but like absolutely, because there have been a lot of times on site when like we look at each other and we're like, wish we had walkie-talkies for this event. That just really does help with a headache. A lot of back and forth, even like movement, and like really, really supports that. Also, something that happened to me recently is I went on site to an event. It was more like a day of coordination thing. And I realized very quickly, I don't have anybody's phone number that I need. So I had a hard time finding some really key players. It was very frustrating. It was a huge headache. And so just, yeah, getting that information ahead of time. I agree with everything that you said, but it's something not to be forgotten. So listeners, if you can think about how you can like help your communication on site, that will probably solve some event headaches for you as well.
And to your point, Mary, that is something I've added to my list is if you have a contact list of any form, actually sitting down before you're on site and putting them into your phone. Even if you're simply putting like Tony, parentheses, security at XYZ hotel, like actually putting these numbers in your phone because if you are in any kind of emergency or setting up those group chats like ahead of arriving on site, just so you have that stuff in place, you can totally do it day of, but listeners, like there's a ton of things that happen day of. So I try to do it the day before or the week before. And then if I put someone's number in, I'll shoot them a text, usually say, hey, this is Logan. I'm the event producer on so-and-so's team, just giving you my number so you have it for Thursday or whatever. Because then that also confirms that if you have the correct number, but taking the time to put it in your phone, and then bonus points if you actually reach out to that person to make sure it's correct and they've got your information saved.
Yeah, absolutely. And then once you are thinking through all of these different kinds of headaches and things like this, or listeners, if you're thinking through some of them while you're listening to this, how do you actually use these memories and these lessons learned to minimize future headaches? Trick question, Logan, because what do you do?
Mary, I feel like you're teeing me up for a softball question. It is my
Mhm.
post-event report. I
Woo!
love writing everything down. I even have a form version that I send to anyone who works with me, who I hire, where I try to get them to send me bullets, while it's still top of mind. Because yes, you need to document it, listeners. It doesn't have to be robust. It can be even as simple as a note on your phone, but like write this stuff down, or you will continue to experience these headaches again and again, and you'll have more that probably fall into that category that we talked about earlier of never being solved because you're not remembering it until you're in the moment. You're like, doy, I forgot this was too much work for one person by the stage to handle all these props. Why didn't I remember that? Write that down. Next year, we need 2 people by the stage. Like these are easy things to do if you do it while it's fresh in your brain.
I love it. Event professionals, take your aspirin, your ibuprofen, your what else is there?
Drink your
Aleve,
water.
your Advil. Did I say that? All of those things, and your post-event report. And next time, you will hopefully solve yourself some event headaches. That unfortunately brings us to the end of our episode today. So Logan has our bonus tip.
Yes, this week, our bonus tip is if you have a lot of different speakers and different PowerPoints at your event, make sure you have more than one clicker option available from your AV team. And I say this because sometimes you'll have speakers who want you to run the slides from the tech table, and other times you'll have speakers who want to plug their laptop in from the stage and just run them off of their own laptop. And while that's a whole nother conversation, you just need 2 clickers. One, a perfect cue, which is the big fancy clicker that talks to a cue light that can reach really far distances. That's what we would use if we were running it from the tech table, but also a USB clicker, which, listeners, pro tip, you can buy this on Amazon for like $30. That's what I did. I brought my own, and that is really good for short range. So meaning a speaker with a podium can still have a clicker in their hand and you just plug it into the speaker's laptop. So I, as an event pro, now always have this on me as a part of my on-site kit because you never know when you need one of these basic USB clickers. And we'll link it in the show notes if you want the one that I use.
Awesome. Great bonus tip, Logan. Thank you for that. And thank you, everybody, for listening to another episode of the Better Events Podcast. We love to have you here. As always, you can follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn at Better Events Pod. You can email us at bettereventspod@gmail.com. We love to hear from you. You can also connect with us directly on LinkedIn. When you do, though, send us a little note when you connect so we know who you are, because sometimes we get a lot of requests and I can't tell if they're real or not. So just put a little note in there and we love to connect with you. And if you want more Better Events content, be sure to register for the 2024 Better Events Conference at bettereventspod.com/conference. Or you can even join our private community on Substack. We'd love to see you all of the places. Thank you so much for listening, and we will be back in your feeds next Wednesday.